Well, good morning. For the next 3 weeks, we're going to be learning about hearing the voice of God. And what I want to equip you with is the ability to hear from God accurately, specifically, and on demand. Jesus said that those who follow him, his sheep, will hear his voice. And so that's what I want to equip you with. But in order for us to do that, we need to have a certain foundational understanding. So go with me right now to John chapter 4, and we're going to read verses 23 and 24. Jesus said this, "The hour is coming and is now here when the true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth." God is spirit, and we don't really understand what that means, except we understand that the spiritual world somehow influences this one. It is a hidden world, but we see the effect of it in the same way that we can see the wind moving upon the tree when we see the tree move, but we don't necessarily see the wind. And it's the same with God. We don't often see God, but we experience the effect of God. In fact, Romans chapter 1 says we can see God's invisible qualities through the creation itself. And so many of us, when we're looking to hear God, or hear God's voice, what we're really looking for is something physical, not something spiritual. Either we're looking for some kind of audible voice, or we're looking for some kind of miracle or some kind of like physical sign. And I love sharing my stories with you of miracles and of physical signs. And I know some of you have heard the audible voice of God. But what I want us to understand today is that it is superior to hear from God spirit to spirit than to have a miracle or some kind of physical sign. Like if you think of Thomas, doubting Thomas, he says, "I'm not going to believe that Jesus has risen from the dead unless I can touch him or see him with my own eyes physically." And so Jesus is very gracious, and he lets Thomas have this physical experience with him, and he touches his hands and his side. He sees the spear mark and he sees the holes in his hands. He sees that is physically Jesus risen from the dead. But then Jesus says to him, "You believe because you've seen. More blessed are those who've not seen and yet believe." God is looking to draw us in. So you think of Moses, for example. Like Moses, he sees a burning bush, a bush that's on fire, that's physical. He turns aside to look, his heart responds, and then he's brought into hearing the voice of God. So God graciously has given him a physical sign that's drawn his heart aside. But God's looking to speak to him heart to heart. It's our invisible world that God's looking to connect with. Our heart with his heart. Our spirit with his spirit. We see the same thing with Elijah. Elijah's discouraged, depressed, needs to connect with God. And there's an earthquake and there's a fire. And after each of these big dramatic signs, the Bible says, but God wasn't in the earthquake, God wasn't in the fire, God wasn't in the thunder. And then there is a still, small voice. And that's the voice of the Spirit. That's the internal voice of God, his true voice, the voice of his Spirit communicating with our spirit. Last illustration, then I'll give you some practicalities. In the Old Testament, God tells the children of Israel to build a tabernacle and later a temple. And that tabernacle, that temple, was divided into 3 parts. There's the outer court, the holy place, and within the holy place, the holiest place, or the Holy of Holies. And that outer court, that would be filled with praises, worship, sacrifices. It was all quite loud and dramatic. But in the holy place, the priest would go in, and his movements there were slow. And then ultimately he would go into the holiest place and be still before God. And that's often where the high priest would hear prophetic messages from God. And that is a picture of the human being. You've got the outer world, the physical world, the body, which we inhabit. And often when we want to connect with God, we begin with worship and we're singing about him, and we're going to be quite physical in expressing that. And that's helping us engage physically with the reality of God. It's helping our minds engage. But then we want to progress to this soul awareness. You know, we've dealt with the physical and now our soul, our mind, we want to slow down a little bit, calm down a little bit, begin thinking about God. But we're really moving forward to this place of spirit to spirit connection where we become still. And if you think about really profound worship times when you've been at some event or maybe in your lounge and you've had the worship playing, the peak moment is not when you're singing your heart out, although sometimes we start there, you know, like we enter his gates with thanksgiving, his courts with praise. The peak moment is when we come to a place of stillness and calm before God. That's where we hear him speak to us spirit to spirit. Now, most of you know, one of the major ways I like to hear from God is I go for walks with him. And I was walking with him this week, and it was really lovely. As I was walking with him, I heard the phrase La Grande Vadrouille. And I didn't know what that meant. I never studied French. I kind of recognized it was the name of a French film that my father-in-law loves. But I didn't know the name of the film, what it meant. And so I Googled it, and it literally means the great walk or the great stroll. And I thought, oh, that's just really lovely. You know, God affirming what I was doing, that practice of going for walks with him, which I've restarted again. But it also affirmed that's the place I hear him. And so I'm, you know, continuing to talk with God and spend time with him. And I'm actually starting, there's lots I'm stressed about. So I'm like churning up all these different thoughts as I'm talking to him, my thoughts rising up towards him. And I hear this word come, garrulous. So I look up, what does the word garrulous mean? You know what it means? It means overly talkative. And so I realized this is kind of God's way of saying to me, John, shut up. John, calm down. It's time for you to listen and be still. And this is the journey of listening to God. It's actually coming to the place of stillness. Like the psalmist says, be still and experience that I'm God. But being still doesn't mean being passive. Like my experience, if you want to experience God speaking to you through dreams, go to bed with a pen and a notepad, with your phone by your bed, ready to record what God gives to you. And God will honor that kind of active heart. Same, like if you want to hear the voice of God, like coming through your thoughts, keep a journal, keep a notepad, keep your notes handy and write down whatever thoughts come to your mind. And as you write down the little that came to your mind, what I find is God adds more. In Galatians chapter 3, Paul says, why does God do miracles amongst you? Is it because you keep the law or is it because of your faith? And it's kind of a rhetorical question. He's basically saying, look, it's just your faith. It's you believe. But we need to understand faith is an active thing. Like, let me read Hebrews 11 verse 6 to you. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. King James version says who diligently seek him. And so faith there is equated with being active, actively moving towards him. And so when we're being still before God, when we're being quiet, it doesn't mean we're not active. We're giving diligent, careful attention to the thoughts that are arising on the inside of us as we're seeking to listen to God. And so I want to give you just 4 tips as we finish today. First one's really simple, obvious one. If you want to hear from God, read the Bible. Like regularly read through the whole Bible in a year, but read chunks of the scriptures. In that way, you'll learn examples of how God speaks. You'll learn the language of God. And I don't just mean really like the kind of phrases that he uses, but you'll learn his values. And you'll be able to weigh what's God speaking and what's just your own thoughts. Because we do need to discern that not every thought that comes into our mind is the heart of God. And so we need the scriptures for those reasons. So you want to grow in hearing God, read the Bible consistently and regularly, read it daily, big chunks of it. Secondly, I'd really encourage you to practice this kind of temple model. You know, like the outer court, holy place, inner place. Like practice this journey into stillness. And for me, like sometimes it looks like I worship, I'm singing songs, and then I calm after a time of singing and I might read a little bit of the Bible and then I'm silent. And so I'm moving from sort of body, as it were, to mind, to spirit. Body, soul, spirit. I'm practicing that journey towards stillness. I'd encourage you to do that. And then the last thing I'd say is keep a journal, keep a record of what God says to you and share it with someone. Weigh it. Like, get them to look at it. There's something about writing it and sharing it with others that is activating the words that God has spoken. Last thing I'd say, and then I'm done. I said that faith's active, and it is. If we want to really grow richly in hearing the voice of God, the one thing we must do is put into practice any instruction or direction that he gives us. Obviously, weigh it with others, because we do get it wrong. But if there's something you think, no, that is God, it's really important to do that thing straight away. And last question I want to leave you with is this. Is there something God has said to you that you're not doing or not practicing? I would earnestly encourage you, do that thing, act on that thing. And as you obey what he's already said, I expect you'll see an increase of new instruction coming. All right, God bless you. Have an amazing week, church. You are so, so loved.